Okay, welcome to installment number 3 of Still to Be Titled with Something Wonderful and Catchy. In this particular videocast, I'm going to be thoroughly self-indulgent and talk about my really long-lived character because I started playing her before I came on staff. Most of her career, I think, was spent before I came on staff, and she shaped the game in a lot of ways, and one of the things I will do is reveal some of the Easter eggs placed within the game that reference various things in that old history, including Khan and Aldane and a lot of the Jakar. So Alkyone was a Whiran. She was my first Whiran. I created her to play again with my friend Sean, who'd come over from Dark Castle. And the character that I had been running with him died, and so I decided to create a Whiran as well. And she was not particularly attractive. She had a huge beaky nose and lots of white hair in various little braids and dark skin, and she was very kind of thin and angular. So I started playing in Ellenac. I hung out with Tasselhoff. If people remember the tassel-braided half-elf, that was my friend Sean. I hung out with Narian, who later got recreated as one of the temple keepers in the Elementalist, the Sukrathi temple. You'll see Narian referenced there. It's presumably his great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandson. She did a lot of hanging out, a lot of kind of wandering back and forth, and she would run up to Tuluk and kind of made a pretty decent living off scavenging corpses. That was the days when scavenging corpses was a viable way to make a living, and buying things in Tuluk that would sell well in Ellenac and vice versa. Jewelry was relatively cheap in Tuluk, and you could sell it for quite a bit in Ellenac if you were willing to invest the money in it. So around this is before the black gems came to Ellenac and the gems that were required, and so all we knew about it was that the Templars were going around requiring elementalists to register, and there was an NPC prophet who was running through the city every once in a while, the many braided woman, or the colorfully braided woman, and she would run through and shout enigmatic things about how the black gems were going to steal our souls, but still most of us took them. And at this time, you could take the gems off and on pretty easily, and you didn't want to wear them up in Tuluk, where you didn't want to be identified as Alanaki in Tuluk. And this was before the days of accents. So you really could kind of travel back and forth and pose as a Tuluki pretty easily. So my friends and I sort of tried, we sort of covertly resisted the gems, and we ended up going into hiding in the labyrinth in someone's old secret lair. And so there were, I don't know, 5 or 6, maybe more of us, all hiding in this lair. And it was another case of kind of sitting there and waiting and waiting and waiting. And it got to the point where we were really dependent on the Rookians to keep us fed. I mean, everybody's food was out of it. And this was, Rookian food, of course, disappeared whenever there was a reboot. And there were a number of reboots, so that had to be factored in. So we really are kind of dependent on the goodwill of the Rookians. And I can remember a stretch there where you logged in, and if you didn't see food lying around, you logged back out because it had been a while, and you really didn't want to die of starvation. So eventually, we got a chance to flee the city. We were taken out by Merit, the charred woman, if anyone remembers that PC. She was run by a guy named John, who was Simkin on Iska. And she was of a kind of mysterious half-elemental or very powerful figure that kind of dragged us out. One of our company, Phaedron, who was a Vivadu and got confronted along the way by, I believe, Sir Thomas Oish, who had hired him as a magician or a magic user and was loath to see him leave the city. So we ended all up going up to Luir's safely in the middle of the night. That was, I think, the beginning. At least several of those people were the foundation of the Conclave later on, or they would become the founding members of the Conclave. But it was still quite some time to come before then. But that was kind of the moment where those people first sort of came together. So ended up kind of going up to Tiluk. I got hired by Kurak, and Kurak was, I got recruited for Kurak by Ryden Kurak. I think he was like the thin, sharp-nosed man. And I ended up working for them. I had become, Alkyone had become a fairly powerful Whiran at that point, and particularly at a point when components were much more sort of guessworthy. You couldn't identify them through magic. You had to kind of use hit or miss and kind of look at the component help files and try to figure out what would that, would this item match up with that or not. So I remember Alkyone used to carry around a pack that just had one of every single item she could think of, all these little, teeth and blue scarves and feathers and bits of charcoal and glass eyes that were possible components. And one of the things that I discovered through this practice was that there were spells that took more than one component, and so that was a revelation. And so then that kind of introduced a whole new way of trying to figure out spells. So I had learned the transference, or the translocation spell, whatever the spell is, it swaps you with another person, and that made the character fairly powerful because she's one of the few people in the game that knew that at the time. So she ended up getting fired by Kurak, and what happened was that we had a character, this guy named Alshek, who was a junior merchant, who in the middle of the Kurak Inn in Luirs insulted Alkyone and suggested something about her age. So she banished him on the spot, relying on the fact that she was playing Kurak to keep the NPCs from jumping her. And what was really funny is he immediately sighed to her and said, "Oh, you teleported me to just a few leagues outside the Tiluk. I will be fine. I'm going to go in there and tell him everything you did." And of course he was being chased around the Mantis Valley at the time and dying. But what was really funny was Dorinus's avatar, and he had just come on staff, and here was his brand new character, and I killed it, and I apologize for that. That was, I think, one of my first P kills on Armageddon, so at least it was distinguished. So, so she got fired from Kurak, and at that point she ended up getting hired by House Komar, which was particularly ironic because while working for Kurak, what she used to do is go ethereal. This is before your equipment fell off when you went ethereal. So she would go ethereal. She would go into the Komar storeroom. She would snort a whole bunch of Melum Tuluk, which makes you stronger. And then she would pick up a chest under either arm, go ethereal a second time, and then go and drop them in the Kurak wagon. Now, this is one of the reasons the ethereal code is the way it is. It was a terrible abuse, and I did it twice before they decided, oh, perhaps we should change that code. And that is why the code is changed that way. So I went to work for Komar, and that was where I became embroiled in the Lord of Ash plot, which Hallister ran, and I will talk more about the Lord of Ash plot line and how Alkyone ended up becoming an elemental, and how she died several times, more than once. So goodbye, and until next time, keep playing.